Macros. It's part of my business name. I talk about macros on the podcast every week. But what are they? How do we calculate how many of them we need? Well, we're going to be delving into all of the macros over the next few weeks. Today we're starting with protein. We are going to do a deep dive on why protein is so very important on this episode of Life and Food with Chef Mimi.
All right, so I got to be honest. When you first came home and started talking about macros, I had no clue what you were talking about. So I thought it'd be a good idea for us to do a podcast about it so you could kind of explain to people why the company is named that and exactly how macros have really affected you in your life.
Sure. You know, what's funny is depending on the person's age that I'm speaking to, some older folk, they think I'm talking about a macrobiotic diet, which was this crazy fad diet, I think probably in like the 80s maybe. I remember I was very young and my mom did it and she was like sprouting food on the counter. She was like growing seeds and eating. It was like a lot of raw. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. It was very strange. But depending on people's age, generally if they're 60 plus and I say macro, they're like, oh, like macrobiotic? And I'm like, nope, not like macrobiotic at all.
You know that there's going to be somebody who's going to post in the comments about this.
Of course. That's fine. That's fine. You know, whatever works for you. You know I'm all about that. So macros are super important because they are a different way of looking at food and a different way of looking at our food intake than just looking at the calories. And it's important when you are looking at your food intake to, I think, take the calories out of it. If you were listening to our podcast last week, one of the diet fads that we were talking about, or one of the myths that we were talking about, is that all calories are created equal. And that really is not the truth. There's excellent sources of calories and there's horrible sources of calories. And yes, when you're looking at weight loss, it does always come down to calories in versus calories out, how much energy you're consuming, how much energy you're expending. However, it can get really confusing when you're looking at calories. So that was a light bulb moment for me. The first time I came across the idea of counting macros or what macros were or looking at food in that way was when I started Kim's program. So if you've been following along from the beginning, you've gotten to listen to Kim. We did a couple episodes with her where she talked about her program, but it's a very balanced way of approaching a weight loss goal, which is that it should be something that you should be able to sustain over time. And a lot of it is a mindset shift. You know, instead of that deprivation, the counting the calories, eating as little as possible, it's about balancing your macros and making sure that the foods that you're choosing have a good balance of protein, fat, and carbs. So there's 4 basic macronutrients. We're going to focus really on just the top 3, but the 4 basic macronutrients are protein, carbohydrates, fats, and then fiber is the 4th one. And fiber is important, but if you're choosing whole foods and you're eating a lot of whole grains and you're focusing on the right kinds of food, fiber just kind of comes along with the package. So we're going to talk mostly today just about protein, carbs, and fat. So it's interesting to me because I am seeing a shift in dietary regulations and what I would say like big medical or big nutrition is putting out. So it used to be, I feel like a long time ago, that if you wanted to know about a topic, you could go to any website that had EDU at the end of it. So education, because it was something coming from a university, there was research behind it, and you were guaranteed to get really good information.
And now it's the opposite.
It's a little bit the opposite, and some of that is AI. There's a lot of AI being used to generate these articles, and there's also for sure political shifts inside of universities. And so where you see broader political shifts outside of universities, just in sort of the way the culture is moving, then you'll begin to see that mirrored inside the institutions. So when I was initially just, I know about protein, I know what it is, and I know how it's made up, and I know what it's good for, but I was just kind of skimming some articles, and something that I'm noticing from a lot of the big EDU names is that they are now saying, you might not need as much protein as you thought. And it's better to consume protein from plant sources than animals. So there's a huge push now for plant-based protein. And if you have not picked up on that already, just in the whole Impossible Burger thing, there's certainly a rise for plant-based protein everything. That is just all across the culture. But it is interesting to me to see that starting to come through in the large institutional journals and articles that are being published. And it doesn't make me super happy because I think that there's certainly a place for plant proteins. I mean, lentils, for example, are an excellent source of protein, but I also don't want to eat lentils every day when there's such a thing as steak. There's also always a push that like red meat is somehow bad.
And, if you think politicians can be bought, researchers can be bought too.
For sure. I think it just boils down to, be careful what you read. Don't take one source of information. If you're trying to research something or, you're looking for a scientific backing for a specific way of eating that you're wanting to undertake, any of those things, make sure that you're doing your due diligence and you're not looking just at one source of information. And also be careful of confirmation bias. So confirmation bias basically is just looking for information that is going to back you up. And so you're searching specifically for that information. And trust me, it's easy to find. And that's on every topic that's ever been out there. You can find something to confirm what you already think. So just be careful of that. Go in with an open mind, of course, but make sure you look at a variety of sources.
Yeah, a few years ago, I developed this habit of, whenever I sort of developed a belief about something where I realized, why do I really, feel so strongly about that? I would actually go out and find the opposite viewpoint.
Well, what I think is that protein is really important, and I know that I'm right. So,
oh yes, you are always right. We know this.
All the EDUs
yes, ma'am.
Can disagree with me, but protein is very important. It also depends too on how active you are. So, if you are in a gym and you are trying to build muscle, you need a lot more protein than someone who has just a sedentary job and they're not really moving around much. So there's a lot of different things to take into account with your protein intake, but just be wary. Like I said, there's a big push for you don't need as much as you thought you did, and maybe you should get it from lentils and crickets now. So let's dial down here and say what is protein? Essentially, it's us. We're like bags of meat, right? And we're made of protein. There's protein throughout our body, in our muscles, our bones, skin, hair. Pretty much all of our body parts are made up of protein. And there's 10,000 different proteins that exist inside your body, which to me is just absolutely crazy. And proteins are made from amino acids. And you've probably heard that before. The thing about amino acids is that your body can only create a certain amount of them by itself. The other ones, you can't store amino acids. So it's not like your body has a storage space of amino acids and it can draw on that storage and it can just make more protein when it needs it. That's not how it works. You know how your body can store carbs and then it can pull on the carbs for energy. That's not really, it's a very different thing for protein, and I think that's why it's so important. So your body can't store those amino acids, and there are 9 really important out of the 22, 24 branch chain amino acids that exist. 9 of them can only be created from food, and there's even less of them that you can get when you're doing plant-based completely. You can only get some of these amino acids from meat. So that's why, to me, that's very important, because your body is literally designed to consume meat. It needs it to make the amino acids that are used to create the protein that is then going to go into your hair and in your nails and build your muscles and all the things.
Now, there's a vegan in a car right now listening to this on his commute, and his head is literally exploding.
Well, I would say, I'm always out here saying, if you do intermittent fasting, I don't think it's the greatest thing, but if it works for you, that's awesome. If you do keto, I don't think it's the greatest thing, but if it works for you, that's awesome. I kind of draw the line at veganism. I don't think it's healthy. I don't think it's a good way to exist. I don't think it's a good way to eat. And I'm sure that there's a lot of people that would disagree with me, but that's my personal opinion. I feel pretty strongly about it, and that's okay. If you are a vegan, you're probably not ordering from me anyway. We don't really have many vegan options. So I'm okay with it. I don't think I'm going to lose a giant customer base here by coming out as an anti-vegan. So what is important to look at when you're consuming your protein is something that a lot of researchers and scientists or nutritionists, whoever, will call your protein package. And what that means basically is how your protein is delivered to you. Protein is fantastic, but sometimes what it comes packaged with is not so good for you. So you have to be careful about how you choose the form of protein that you are going to eat. For example, steak is fantastic, high protein. It's going to have a little bit more fat. However, your body actually needs fat. Fat is not bad. So red meat, there's nothing wrong with it. However, you wouldn't be able, if you are working, on hitting macros, let's say, that are like 130 grams of protein, but then only, let's say, 50 grams of fat, you probably couldn't have sirloin for breakfast, lunch, and dinner without kind of blowing the fat content of your day, or having that be your only fat content for the day. You wouldn't be able to sub in any sauces or dips or, anything like that in with your meals, cooking with butter, those sorts of things. So it's always good to kind of, make sure as you're going through your day, as you're planning your day, that you have a mixture of lean and more fatty proteins. That just is kind of common sense. And then be careful about any sort of processed protein. That's going to be your lunch meats. That stuff is generally going to be a little higher in sodium, which again, not the worst thing in the world for you, as long as you're not overeating it. But be careful, because like lunch meat can be really sneaky. If it's like a honey ham, it can have a lot of carbs. Salmon is very high in protein, naturally low in sodium, and it has fat, but it's very little saturated fat. It's super, super healthy for you, but it does have a lot of fat. So again, you have to kind of plan out your day if you're having salmon. It's funny because I was at the gym today and we were talking about our macros, and one of the ladies that was working out said, I had salmon for lunch and I hadn't planned my macros for the day. And then when I inputted everything, I had a lot of fat with breakfast this morning. And then I had that salmon at lunch, and man, I don't have any fat grams left for dinner. And she was kind of laughing about it. So it's just something that, be aware of. If you're going to have steak or you're going to have salmon, you want to make sure that you have maybe a lower fat content protein planned for the rest of the day. There's also, protein powders, which are fantastic. There are some that are really good. There are some that aren't great. So the FDA doesn't police protein powders, so be careful. But generally speaking, you've got your like big 10 names, right? There's like Quest, Isopure, you've got Rule 1, which is really, really good. You've got Beverly, which is fantastic. So you've got your main ones. And for a lot of people, that's just about how does it mix up? Are they making it in a shake? Do you mix it with your water? What kind of flavors do they have? Just be watching your nutrition label on that as well. Make sure that there's not a lot of super processed ingredients or a lot of hidden carbs, that sort of thing. Now, okay, we know what protein is. We know why we need it. You want to be careful about how you consume it. But I want to talk about probably the most important thing to me, which is why protein is so important for weight loss. If you just look at it at a high level, like, oh, red meat, it has saturated fat in it. I think it's easy for some people to say, well, that's not a healthy way to eat. But I think when you start dialing into the research behind why protein is so good for weight loss, that's where you start seeing how truly important it is if you're undertaking this journey. Even though people will say fat helps you feel full, it does. It absolutely does. It gives you a feeling of like being satiated, like really satisfied after you eat, and that's fantastic. But actually, studies show that protein is absolutely the most filling food that you can eat. So it helps you feel more full with less food than any of the other macros. And partly that's because when you consume protein, it goes into your body and it reduces the hunger hormone called ghrelin, which I always want to say gremlin when I see it, because also I'm like, why shouldn't a hunger hormone be called gremlin? Like, as someone who struggled with my weight like their entire lives, I just feel like we should rename it gremlin.
The ghrelin gremlin.
The ghrelin gremlin. Yeah.
Say that 10 times fast.
I feel like I should be trademarking this, probably. And then it also boosts the levels of a peptide called YY. It's just YY peptide. And that's a hormone that makes you feel full. So literally, when you're eating protein, it is going into your body and it is turning down the hormone that makes you feel hungry and turning up the hormone that makes you feel full. I mean, that's like a magic bullet. Like, that's literally what a lot of these weight loss medications out there now do. They like mimic that. And you could just be eating protein, you guys. This can be so powerful. I found this, I was looking at studies. I was trying to find a few studies to point to that I thought were really interesting. So there was one study where they studied overweight women and they increased their protein intake from 15% to 30% of their calories. That's actually pretty big. And they made them eat 441 fewer calories a day. All they had to do was just increase their protein, and naturally they consumed almost 500 calories less a day because they felt so full from that increased protein. And that's so interesting because when Kim was in the studio and we were talking about it, she was saying that so many people who start her program, they initially feel like they're getting too much food and that it's not going to work for them. And it's not that they're eating too much food, it's that they're eating more protein. And so they're getting more full and they're feeling more full longer. And so they're going like, I don't know if I can eat all this food. You know, I used to eat very little before and now I'm eating all this food. This is not going to make me lose weight. It's totally a mindset shift. And that's why focusing on the macros is so important. Then, if you're working out, if you're trying to build muscle, protein is the building block of muscles. If you go to the gym and you're working out and you're not consuming enough protein, your body will literally eat that muscle as fast as you create it. You can't sustain the muscle that you're building. So you have to have adequate amounts of protein in order to build strength and build those muscles to where you want them to be. And then if you keep it high, not only will it help you build the muscle, it'll help you not have muscle loss afterwards. Also, there is a myth out there about animal proteins and milk being bad for your bones. I am quite familiar with this myth, and I'm also quite familiar with the fact that it's not true. Basically, the idea behind that is that if you consume a lot of protein, it increases an acid load in your body and it leaches calcium out of your bones. However, long-term studies, which sometimes can be more important, show that protein, including animal protein, actually have major benefits for bone health. Shocking. People who eat more protein tend to maintain bone mass better as they age and have a much lower risk of osteoporosis. Super important for women, especially if you have osteoporosis that runs in your family, which I do. So for me, protein intake is super important for so many reasons. One, right, for weight loss. Two, it makes me feel good and full and healthy. Three, I'm moving very heavy weight in the gym. And so that helps me build that muscle. It makes sure I don't lose that muscle after my workout. It's helping my bones. It's giving me longevity. All of these things are so important.
Well, I remember when I first met you that I noticed that there was no milk in the refrigerator at your apartment. And I said something to you about it. And you were like, my mom always believed that milk made your bones weak. And there are very few moments where I am like stunned to the point of like a complete loss for words. And that was one of them. I remember standing there for a good 30 seconds, like trying to wrap my head around that.
Yes. The unfortunate thing about that for me is that because I was raised in a home where we really didn't consume milk, that I don't really like it. So I'm not a milk drinker. The only time I ever will willingly drink a glass of milk is when I'm pregnant, which I do think it's funny that when I'm pregnant, I crave it a lot. It has to be very cold, generally on ice and sometimes with chocolate in it. But yeah, when I'm not pregnant, the idea of drinking a glass of milk, it just feels completely bizarre to me.
And that really contributed to you having some dental problems there for a long time.
Sure, yeah, I think for sure I had a major calcium deficiency, and probably I still struggle with some vitamin deficiencies just in general. I really got plugged into that, and it has helped so many parts of my life, and I want to just share that with you guys. So the other thing too, and especially at dinner time, if you're eating a dinner and it's really high in protein, that can reduce the craving and desire for late night snacking, mostly just because you're full. So another study that they did was they studied overweight men, and they increased their protein to 25% of calories. So in the earlier study, they increased women's from 15 to 30. And this one, they just increased guys' protein up to 25% of their calories. It was a study of overweight men. And they actually, when they did that, it reduced their cravings and their desire to snack at night by 60%. And I know that that's something that you have noticed recently because you've been working on your protein intake, is that when you're really hitting your protein goals, especially like breakfast and lunch, that you don't feel snacky in the afternoon and that you feel totally satiated and not really getting hungry again until dinner time.
Yeah, and that's primarily because I just switched back onto your food. I mean, there's the plug. So that put on some weight over the past few years and decided it was finally time to do something about it. And just as when you started at the company, as your guinea pig, and you put me on the food for 90 days and I lost 20 pounds. And I wasn't exercising or doing anything else. So I knew if I just went back on the food, and I remembered that I wasn't ever hungry and that the snacking just wasn't an issue. And again, I've only been back on the food for about a week and I feel full all the time.
Yeah, it does make a big difference. Another thing that ties into why you don't feel as snacky is because when you eat, the instant you start putting something in your mouth, your metabolism starts up, right? Because it has something to do. So everything turns on and it starts running. It's called the thermic effect of food, the TEF, the TEF, okay? Not all foods are the same, though. Protein has a much higher thermic effect than fat or carbs. So that's 20 to 35% compared to 5 to 15 for fat and carbs. So basically what that means is that when you eat protein and that metabolism starts up and it starts working on burning the food that you've eaten, it's going to work a lot harder, i.e. you're going to be burning more calories because your body is working harder to digest protein than it would if you were just digesting fat and carbs. What it does is it actually boosts your metabolism. High protein diets boost your metabolism and they increase the number of calories you burn, and that can amount to 80 to 100 more calories burned every day just by increasing the amount of protein that you're eating, literally just by existing. Just the fact that you've eaten it and then you're sitting there after you've eaten, your body could be burning up to 80 to 100 more calories a day, literally just trying to break the protein down, which I think is so cool. It also can lower your blood pressure, which is amazing because so many people say like, oh, if you eat a lot of red meat, there's you're going to have issues with your blood pressure. Oh, you're going to have issues with your cholesterol. A lot of that, we talked about this last week, really has been shown not to be true. Blood pressure is a major cause of heart attacks, strokes, kidney disease. However, higher protein intake has been shown to lower blood pressure. So they've done 40 controlled trials where they increase protein and then monitor people with high blood pressure. And on average, it reduces by a significant margin. If they just increase protein without treating it in any other way, the blood pressure will start coming down. Also, what I find very interesting is that there have been several studies that have been done that in addition to lowering blood pressure, a high-protein diet also reduced bad cholesterol and triglycerides, which flies right in the face of that old diet myth, which is that red meat and eating protein gives you high blood pressure and high cholesterol. It's just not true.
Oh, yeah. I mean, how many people have we come across that they had heart attack or heart trouble, and their doctors immediately told them they couldn't eat red meat anymore.
Right. Yeah. That's it. You can't, that's it. No saturated fat. You're never having another steak. It's just patently not true. I think sometimes that's why I question when I read articles or I see something that comes out and I think, that doesn't seem right. Because if you look back through the history of our country and of our food system and our nutritional beliefs, there have been a lot of mistakes and there have been a lot of claims that have made that if you go back and look at them, they were generally driven by like large lobbyists of different corporations or different types of foods, that sort of thing. So it's just always good to be careful and try to weed out the bad information.
For decades, tobacco companies were paying doctors to go on TV and tell people that smoking was good for them.
You can't trust everybody. You can probably trust very few people. Truly.
I trust you, but you shouldn't trust me.
No,
ever.
100%.
Never.
I can vouch
me.
for that.
Do
You can
not
trust me,
Joe.
but not him. All right, so another reason why protein is so important and high protein diet is so important is because once you have gotten to your goal weight, it will actually help you maintain your weight loss. So because it boosts your metabolism and it leads to that automatic reduction in calorie intake and cravings, they have shown through multiple studies that once you reach a goal weight, eating a high protein diet will help you maintain that instead of yo-yoing up 10 pounds, tightening up your diet, coming down 10 pounds, yo-yoing up 10 pounds, tightening up your diet, coming back down. It'll actually just help you maintain with very little effort, very little tracking, very little intense scrutiny on your diet. Once you're at that goal weight, if you just focus on protein first and high protein, your body will naturally, the metabolism will stay boosted. You'll feel full. You're not eating crap because you're full. And it's just going to naturally keep you at that, level range where you want to stay. Okay, so then there's another myth about protein, which is that if you eat too much protein, it can be bad for your kidneys. There is the tiniest kernel of truth there, which of course people then take and they spool it into a much larger thing. The small kernel of truth there is that if you have kidney disease, you may need to restrict your protein intake. That's for someone who has kidney disease, okay? This is not for a normal, healthy person. What they have shown is that if you have healthy kidneys, a very high protein diet absolutely has no effect on your kidneys. It will not do anything bad to your kidneys. There's actually a lot, like numerous studies that have been done because this did become such a big deal for a little bit there about, protein being really bad for your kidneys. There was numerous studies done that have underscored that high protein diets actually do not harm your kidneys at all if you're just a healthy individual. Obviously, if you're listening to this and you have kidney disease, please go talk to your doctor. Don't listen to me, okay? I don't know what I'm talking about when it comes to kidney disease. All right, another one is that what you're doing when you're lifting weights basically is you're creating like little micro tears in your muscle. And then protein goes there to help the injury because your body kind of sees it as an injury. And then that builds on the muscle. That makes your muscle grow, right? Okay, we all kind of know how that works.
We're made of meat.
We are meat bags. Bags full of meat. Okay? We are really...
It's a really weird thought to have sometimes. It's like, I'm made entirely of meat.
Yes. There's another great thing, though, is that if you are injured in any way or you have a surgery of any type, that eating high protein prior to and after the surgery, and if you have an injury, eating high protein after the injury will actually boost your body's ability to repair itself more quickly, which is just amazing to me. Like, when you look at all of the studies and you lay them all out like this, it is shocking to me that anyone can then look at protein and say, well, you probably don't need as much as you think you need, and it's probably not as good for you as you think it is, and maybe you should just eat plants. I just don't understand when you start digging into the research and all of the studies how anyone can come away with that conclusion. I teach a high school English class, and I tell my students all the time, when you're reading articles, when you're reading books, just know that it's not a guarantee that the person who wrote that article or who wrote that book is coming at it with a completely unbiased approach, because we're humans and we all have biases. be aware of the agenda. If you start to see an agenda, there is one. If you can sense that they're trying to push a specific narrative or a specific worldview, then they probably are. And that's okay. You can still read it. Just go into it knowing that the agenda is there. And then one of the last things that I wanted to talk about as to why protein is so important, just in general with weight loss and with health, is that it will actually really help you with aging. So when you're aging, basically what happens, there's like 10 signs of aging. I listened to a really fascinating podcast recently with a doctor who does stem cells. A lot of what he was treating were sort of age-related issues. And he gave the 10 markers for aging. And one of the main ones that kind of filters down through all of the other 10 is muscle weakness. Is that as you age, your muscles become less and less resilient and you start to lose muscle mass and you become weak, which then affects your balance and your coordination. And, it kind of tumbles downhill after that. Severe cases of weakening muscles as you age are called sarcopenia. It is the main cause of bone fractures, frailty, reduced quality of life for older people. One of the best ways to reduce age-related muscle deterioration and to prevent sarcopenia is by eating more protein. I was going to say, can you guess what it is? You already know what it is. It's eating more protein. And then staying physically active. So it's those two things in conjunction of maintaining your protein intake the older you get and staying active. Those two things together while doing all of the other myriad things that I've been talking about, which is reducing cravings, helping you feel full longer, helping repair after an injury. Above and beyond all that, it will actually slow the aging process if you stay active and increase your protein. As someone who's not elderly, but I feel like I'm starting to hit that period of my life where I'm starting to look at certain things slowing down, possibly being perimenopausal, those sorts of things. Looking forward at my bone health, it just sort of how I want to go forward into middle age. I've been doing a lot of research on longevity and health into middle age. I think it's certainly one thing to be 25 and you can bounce back after anything. It's a different thing to be in your 40s, in your 50s, in your 60s, and be trying to lose weight when you're going through menopause, when you are, trying to stay active when you've had a hip replacement, any of those things. Some types of exercises are not accessible. Some lifestyle changes are not accessible. Some things are really difficult when you're in those stages of your life or you have physical mobility issues. The thing that I love about protein is that it is accessible to everyone. It is easy to get. It is cheap. It is delicious to prepare. It is wonderful to eat. It makes you feel great. And above all of that, it is going to help you in all of these aspects of your journey, whether you are maintaining a weight loss, whether you are, on the smaller side and you're trying to bulk up in the gym, whether you are actively in a large weight loss journey. Protein is an accessible, easy, and scientifically proven way to help you in all of those areas. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Life and Food with Chef Mimi, while we discuss protein and all the ways in which it is important. Join us over the next few weeks as we dive into carbohydrates, fats, fiber, what they are, why they're helpful, why they're not helpful. If you're a vegan, you probably won't be listening ever again, and I'm sorry to lose you. But for everyone else, please join us next week.